It's a typical day at Columbia University in New York, with students acutely aware of Dr. Alexander Hartdagen's presence in the hallways. However, the doctor's deep immersion in his research leads him to forget about a date with his girlfriend, Emma. Hartdagen is a visionary, and despite it being his first year as an associate professor at the university, he dreams big for his students, wanting them to break free from societal norms and not merely follow the same well-trodden paths, wearing the same hats as everyone else. At home, he prepares in his lab for a meeting with his colleague, David Philby, who advises Hartdagen to adopt a more conventional mindset and not get too carried away with his inventions and wild scientific ideas. Just before their meeting, Hartdagen gets sidetracked by a faulty automobile prototype. The owner offers him a ride, but Hartdagen declines, preferring to proceed with his plans, though not without some reluctance. Now with Emma, Hartdagen is anxious, trembling as he prepares to propose. Despite his nerves, he pushes through and offers Emma a ring, which she happily accepts. But their evening is abruptly cut short when a mugger emerges from the forest, demanding their valuables. Emma resists handing over her ring, but the thief insists. A brief struggle ensues, and in a devastating moment, Emma is shot at close range, dying in Hartdagen's arms. Fast forward 4 years, and Alexander Hartdagen is more consumed by science than ever before. His obsession deeply concerns his housekeeper, Mrs. Watchett, and Philby, who pleads with him to snap out of his despair and move forward. Hartdagen's overwhelming grief drives Philby away. Later, Hartdagen reveals his most extraordinary creation, a time machine, which he intends to use to bring Emma back. The machine works flawlessly, transporting him back to the fateful night when Emma died. Overjoyed to see her alive once again, Hartdagen recalls the events of that night and chooses to head straight for the city instead of taking the forest route. On his walk, he deliberately ignores the familiar prototype car that passes by, focusing entirely on Emma. Sensing something unusual in his behavior, Emma questions him, but Hartdagen only urges her to go home and stay safe. After saying a few heartfelt words, he leaves her in the care of his past self, sparing her from her untimely death. Before departing, Hartdagen stops to buy Emma the flowers he had promised but never gave. However, as he enters the florist, tragedy strikes again. Emma is hit by a car and killed. Rather than being overcome with sorrow, Hartdagen is perplexed, realizing that fate is determined to keep them apart. He decides on another journey in the time machine to discover a solution, traveling this time to New York in 2030, where humanity has advanced to the point of colonizing the moon. Hartdagen visits the public library and meets Vox, a holographic assistant who claims to have access to all the world's knowledge. Amazed, Hartdagen asks for information on time travel, but it is dismissed as fiction. Hartdagen himself is mentioned among notable names linked to time travel, primarily as a novelist. Frustrated, he decides to travel even further into the future, reaching the year 2037, where he encounters a world ravaged by disaster. Rescuers inform him that the moon was shattered due to the destruction caused by the moon colony, with devastating consequences for Earth. Panicking, Hartdagen rushes back to his time machine, but in his haste, he stumbles and accidentally sends himself into a distant future where the world has drastically changed. His journey ends in the year 800-2701, where he is rescued by an indigenous people who nurse him back to health. Upon regaining consciousness, Hartdagen meets one of his young rescuers, an Aboriginal boy. He soon discovers that the people live in a community of huts clinging to the mountainsides, and his sudden appearance causes great surprise among the tribe. A girl from the tribe, able to communicate in a forgotten stone language, explains that everyone learns it as children, but forgets it with time. The village chief suggests they throw the stranger into the river to rid themselves of him, but the girl disagrees. Hartdagen attempts to explain that he is from the past, though the girl struggles to comprehend this idea fully. Mara introduces herself to the group and convinces them that the stranger is just a wandering fool who hit his head along his journey, allowing him to escape the situation without much trouble. Hartdegen later explains the traditions of his former world during the night, something Mara's brother Kalen finds intriguing. They offer him a place to stay for the night, and Mara reveals that their parents had left the area. Hartdegen is amazed at how much the world has changed by this point in history. Looking up at the sky, he notices the moon has been shattered with a small ring of debris orbiting around it. Curious, the doctor asks why they pull their boats out of the water at night, assuming it's to prevent them from being stolen. Mara doesn't recognize the word stolen, and instead suggests they go pick flowers the next day. In the forest, an ominous presence approaches, leading to a skull monument. However, it turns out to be just a nightmare, causing Hartdegen to wake up in a panic. Kalen has had a nightmare too, but his sister comforts him. When Hartdegen shares the details of his dream with Mara, she understands it clearly, explaining that everyone there has experienced the same nightmare before. He asks about the word Morlock, but Mara dismisses it as just a children's tale. The following day, Hartdegen witnesses how society has evolved, with the tribe keeping remnants of the old cities as keepsakes. Mara questions why he chose to travel through time, and he explains that it was to understand why the past cannot be changed. She struggles to comprehend this, but eventually realizes it's about trying to reclaim something lost. While on a canoe ride, Hartdegen asks why there are no elders in the village, but Mara simply responds that they left so as not to live in the past. They reach a field of windmills, where Kalen excitedly greets them, eager to hear more stories about New York and the people of the past. Mara and Hartdegen eventually find the time machine, and out of nowhere, she asks the doctor to take her brother back to the past, her tone suddenly shifting to fear. He's confused by her request, but distant shouts and roars alert them that the village is in danger. The screams grow louder as they arrive to see the villagers fleeing in panic. Hartdegen encounters a humanoid ape-like creature and runs for safety. Soon, more creatures appear, attacking the villagers with darts, one of which strikes Mara. Upon closer inspection, Hartdegen notices a black, tar-like substance on the dart. But before he can investigate further, the villagers are surrounded by the creatures, which emerge from the ground. Using incredible strength and primitive hunting methods, the creatures bind and capture several villagers. One of the beasts sets its sights on Kalen, and Hartdegen rushes to save him. A chase ensues, with Hartdegen clinging to one of the windmills as the creature grabs him by the legs. After a fierce struggle, the creature falls several meters, briefly knocked unconscious. When it awakens, it climbs back up and drags Hartdegen down with it. Kalen intervenes, using fire to drive the creature away, and they manage to escape through hidden tunnels in the sand. When Hartdegen returns, he discovers Mara has been taken to the creature's lair. He proposes a rescue mission, but the villagers don't understand his urgency. To them, this is just the way life works in the village. When Hartdegen criticizes their lack of defense, the village leader explains that those who fight are often the first to be captured. Determined, Hartdegen speaks to Kalen, urging him to take action, but the boy confirms that the creatures are indeed the Morlocks, and insists that once someone is taken, there's nothing that can be done. Despite this, Kalen mentions a place where the ghosts dwell, and agrees to lead Hartdegen there at night. They arrive at a hidden space filled with relics of the past, including holograms of Vox, which Hartdegen recalls from his visit to the museum. Although Vox can no longer update his software, he shares that there are now two dominant species on Earth, one above ground and the other below. Over time, Vox has developed a cynical awareness, lamenting that he possesses all the knowledge in the world but can do nothing with it. He remembers Hartdegen's earlier visit and reveals that a villager once escaped from the Morlocks and stayed with him, sharing stories. The doctor presses Vox for the truth, but the hologram warns him that the reality is harsh. Vox informs him that the Morlocks came from the east, offering a potential lead. As Hart-Dagon ventures east, he stumbles upon the skull monument from his nightmares. Determined, Hart-Dagon sets off to rescue Mara, and Kalen mentions that the Morlocks also took his watch, something Hart-Dagon finds puzzling. He climbs down a cliff and discovers a cave entrance. Inside, he finds advanced machinery, far beyond what the surface villagers are capable of. Following a pair of Morlocks through the tunnels, Hart-Dagon uncovers their underground society, complete with metallurgy. He stumbles into a grim butcher's room filled with torture instruments and a pile of clothing, among which he finds Mara's necklace. While exploring, he accidentally activates a lever, causing him to fall into a pit filled with human remains. The Morlocks capture him, locking him away in a dark cell. The basement is much more expansive than anticipated, and after descending the stairs, Mara is discovered inside a cage with a figure seated on a throne before her. The figure is the Uber Morlock, the leader of the tribe, and he explains that ever since the moon's destruction, the human race has split into two factions, those who live above and those who dwell below. The Morlocks reproduce in different castes, some serving as the brain, others as the muscle, and all easily manipulated through telepathy. They capture surface humans to use as food, sparing only the few most suitable to become vessels for new Morlocks. He adds that he's currently using his telepathic abilities to restrain the Morlocks, as without his control, they would quickly exhaust their food supplies. The Uber Morlock then peers into Hart-Dagon's memories, accusing him of hypocrisy for condemning their way of life, while his own time traveling is equally unnatural. Hart-Dagon notices his old watch box in the back of the room and is suddenly transported to his former laboratory, filled with blueprints for the time machine. There, he finds Emma and their imagined children, the life he never experienced. The Uber Morlock reveals the reason Hart-Dagon can't change the past. Emma's death drove him to invent the time machine. Without her death, the machine would never have existed, creating an unavoidable time paradox. The creature then shows Hart-Dagon the time machine and offers it to him. Hart-Dagon asks for his watch as well, and the Uber Morlock hands it over. But just then, Hart-Dagon pulls him close, sparking a struggle. In the midst of the fight, Hart-Dagon activates the time machine, but the Uber Morlock's strength is overwhelming. Hart-Dagon breaks a valve on the machine, diverting the Uber Morlock's attention and causing him to hang outside the machine's range, aging rapidly until he turns to dust. Once Hart-Dagon is safe, he notices that the machine's year reads over 635 million, revealing a future world devastated and controlled by Morlocks. He makes his final choice. Hart-Dagon returns to the year 800,000 to save Mara, using his watch to jam the time travel mechanism and make his escape. He and Mara face off against the remaining Morlocks as they attempt to escape the tunnels. The machine unleashes a time wave that ages the creatures to dust, and the pair narrowly escape. Mara laments the loss of the time machine, but Hart-Dagon is unfazed, having finally let go of his past. As time moves on, the tribe now enjoys peace, entertained by stories of the past from Vox. Hart-Dagon shares memories of his old lab with Mara and Kalen, recounting tales of Philby and Mrs. Watchett, who, in a parallel memory, are content that their friend has found happiness at last. Philby tells Mrs. Watchett that he and his wife will need a new housekeeper, offering her the job. She agrees, at least until Mr. Hart-Dagon returns. As Philby departs, he tosses his top hat into the air in tribute to his friend. Subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like to support the channel. Thank you for watching.